Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Creating Space podcast. My name is Olivia Lancashire, and as a part of my undergraduate research with the Lumen Prize at Elon University, I'm going to be conducting a series of interviews that will explore my current project, the intersection between Christian perspectives on hell and religious trauma. In this podcast series, I will be interviewing individuals from a range of expertise, including pastors, counselors, biblical scholars, and psychologists. In doing so, I hope to create a space for questions that a lot of people are too afraid to talk about. Today, I am excited to be joined by Tova Sido. Tova Sido is based in Dallas, Texas, and is an ordained pastor, spiritual counselor, speaker, author, and podcast host of The Remedy. In 2005, she left the corporate work world to enter into ministry, and since then has been providing hope and healing for individuals. Welcome, Tova.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you. So, for the first question, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got inspired to pursue this path of ministry and counseling?
Yes, happy to. First of all, I commend you immensely for tackling such a tricky topic. I mean, this is a very a lot of people have a lot of passion about hell, and a lot of people have very strong opinions about hell, and so most people don't want to touch it because of the potential to hurt or offend or and so I really commend you for having the courage to have this kind of conversation and continue to have these kinds of conversations because I think it is so needed. um
I appreciate
so good job, Olivia. um okay, so how did I get into ministry?
that. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so it was not what I always thought I would do. I was
Mhm.
actually raised Mormon. Um, so I don't know if you knew that, Olivia, but
Yeah.
yes. So I was raised Mormon, and Mormons, as you may or may not know, or your listeners may or may not know, have a very definitive idea about hell and
Mhm.
heaven and who goes there and who goes to each,
Yeah.
And so it was actually one of the reasons why I left Mormonism because I struggled so much with this concept of a God who, say I lived in some obscure place and had never been exposed to Jesus Christ, and now all of a sudden, but I'm a good human who's done good things, and but I'm going to hell because I was never exposed to Christianity or the opportunity to be saved, or
Yeah.
whatever word verbiage you want to use. And so it was actually one of the things that I struggled with a lot with that faith. And so after I graduated BYU, I left I left Mormonism, and I didn't go to church for several years because I didn't know where to go to church. I didn't know what to do. Um, So when I got married in 1999, it was important to my husband and I at the time that when we had children that we pursued faith. And so we kind of landed on Methodism, being Methodist, which we really enjoyed. We went through a lot of loss early on in our marriage. We were both carriers, we didn't know it, of the same rare metabolic disease. It's called mitochondrial disease. And so in a matter of 5 years, I had a stillborn, a miscarriage, and I gave birth to a son and then a daughter. And in 5 years, they all passed away, um, because of this rare disease that we didn't know. So it's a recessive gene. And so it really shook me to my core to have this much loss. In the middle of it all, I also lost my mom, and she died of breast cancer. And so I actually went to my pastor for pastoral care. I was just lost, lonely, sad, very depressed. At times, I even felt suicidal. And and I just didn't know what to do because my dream was to be a mom. And I went to him. His name was Mark Craig at Highland Park Methodist Church for pastoral care. And he was asking me what I wanted to do. And I told him I wanted to be a mom. And he said, well, it doesn't look like that's going to be an option in the very near future. And so he actually offered me a job on the spot
Wow.
and said, come work at the church. You need a distraction. And I joke that I was crying so hard that he, like, during our visit, he probably just wanted to get me out. So he hired me immediately, and which was seemed very strange. I never pictured, or my brother's calling me. Um, and so I started working at the church, and that was 2005, and I ended up working at the church for 10 years. Became the youth pastor, and then became pastor of one of the largest contemporary services that the Methodists have, called Cornerstone, and went through the ordination process. And it was just a beautiful journey. So that's, I mean, it literally just landed in my lap and kind of took on a mind of its own. And so I've been a pastor and doing ministry and counseling ever since. So almost 20 years now.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. That is a lot of loss, and I can't imagine how hard that must have been. Um, and I'm so glad that your experience in seeking something greater than yourself and, yeah, something that would unite you with other people as well was a positive experience, because that's so important. And I think, unfortunately, for some people, they go and seek something greater than themselves and end up in an institution that might not provide
And
that same care. So I'm really glad that you had a good experience with that and that it led to your whole career. That's so, so awesome.
yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. And I mean, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I was created to do. And that feels so fantastic.
Yeah, I bet. That's so awesome. So you said that you grew up in the Mormon church. And so I'm assuming that hell was a concept that was introduced to you in the Mormon church. And then can you talk a little bit about how you might have been exposed to it in the Methodist church and what that looked like and how that varied?
Yes. So Mormons are not afraid to talk about hell. They're not afraid to assign people to hell. They're not afraid to talk about what you need to do in order to make sure you don't go to hell. And it's I think a lot of faiths use hell as a fear tactic, as a way to keep people in the fold.
Yeah,
Uh, and and I don't know, because I've never been in those closed door meetings, but I don't know what the motivation is for the Mormon church, but I know that when I was young and even all through being a teenager, I was so terrified that I was going to go to hell. So my motivation in doing good and being good was not for the greater good. It was so I didn't go to hell.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yes, absolutely.
So I was just like checking boxes and desperate to do the right thing. And then when I didn't do the right thing and I did the wrong thing, yeah, I immediately was filled with fear and guilt and shame to an unimaginable degree, because I was sure, because of the choices I was making, now I was going to hell. Which, if you think you're going to hell, that that fills you with such fear
Yeah,
and guilt and shame that I it's not motivating. At least it wasn't for me. It kind of just it made me it really affected my self-esteem. It really affected how I felt about myself. It really affected how I looked at myself. It really affected how I showed up in the world. I started to like, I felt like I hid a lot of myself because it was like if they knew the truth, I would be in so much trouble, like I would be in so much trouble. And so I don't know, I kind of learned how to keep a lot of secrets, and which never feels good when you have secrets. So I was very fearful. Methodists do, Methodists believe in hell. Methodists believe that, but Methodists don't spend a lot of time pounding on pulpits talking about who's going there.
Yeah,
And they try to inspire people to do well through the good, through the good and the kind and the fruits of the spirit, love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, like those kinds of things versus like if you don't do this, then you're going to be weeping and gnashing teeth for eternity. I mean, they
yeah,
use a completely different. It's like you want this path because it's probably going to be a lighter path, not you want this path because if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. I found it to be very inspiring.
yeah,
Um, and like, oh, I want to do good so I can feel good, so I can manifest good, so I can be there for others. The motivation for being good, I put good in quotes because what is that? I don't know yet. um, was the motivation was completely turned upside down for me, which felt was such a relief.
yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Um, have you seen this idea of hell come up a lot in pastoral care and spiritual counseling? And if you have, how do you kind of navigate those conversations? Um, and even just black and white ideology in general, how do you enter into conversations like
Great,
that in the Christian world?
great question. And so as you can imagine, when I was kind of leaving the Mormon church and then not going to church and then kind of getting used to the way and listening, I was so overwhelmed. I mean, I remember the first time like the first few times I was going to the Methodist church and I would hear the pastor, Mark Craig, speak from the pulpit, I would just weep because it was a message of joy, and it was inspiring and it was motivating. I wasn't afraid.
Yeah,
And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to make mistakes either. Like I learned that I'm human, and humans are humans. We make mistakes.
yeah,
And so I was learning about redemption and salvation, and I was learning about grace, and about I'd never learned about those words. And so um there for me that was profound.
yeah,
And another thing that really made a very big difference in my faith and made a lot of sense to me, and I've used a lot in pastoral counseling when people come to me with this idea or trying to make sense of reconciling heaven and hell, and how does a man who's born in India to a Hindu family who's lovely, and like are we really going to say that that man's going to hell? I had a really hard time with things like that. And so there's a pastor, he's a Methodist pastor, his name is Adam Hamilton, and he wrote a book years ago that I read, and it's called Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White.
yes,
And he took these very controversial, he is he, I can't, I'm trying to remember where he is out of, but he is the pastor of the largest Methodist church in the world. And he wrote this book, and he took all of these, like, again, these super controversial topics like abortion,
mhm,
being gay, um things that people want to, like, oh, you've had an abortion, going to hell. Oh, you're gay, going to hell. Oh, you're trans, going to hell. And so he takes all of these very, which is so brave, took these very controversial topics, and he makes an argument for why there we cannot be black and white when it comes to these topics, like, and how God might even be a little more gray with these topics than one might feel comfortable with or one might think. But it just spoke to my soul, because I think the more we know, the less we know. Uh,
Yeah.
Even when it comes to faith, especially maybe when it comes to faith, because there is so much that we don't know. First Corinthians, I know a lot of people who will listen to this will have heard the First Corinthians 13
Yeah.
verse, love is patient, love is kind, just read at every wedding. It's beautiful. At the end of those verses, which is often left out and not as popular, it says something incredibly profound.
Mhm.
And what it says is, now we see things dimly, but one day we will see things very clearly. We only see things in part. We only understand things in part, because we're human beings, with very limited capacity, very limited head, brain power,
Yeah.
and we can't comprehend eternity, God, heaven, hell. We can't. We're too small. Our minds are too small, and so it's just having this faith that we don't have all of the answers. We
Yeah.
just don't. We
Yeah.
There's no way we have all of the answers, and so instead, like, how on earth, literally, could we assign and really know what happens in the life after this one?
Yeah.
And it's just not my job as a pastor. It's not my job as a spiritual counselor. It's not my job as a spiritual leader, as a Bible study teacher, to assign or try to make sense of who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. And I actually think, Mark Craig, years ago, he gave this amazing sermon about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. He goes, all I know is I think I'm going to go to heaven, and I think when I walk in, I'm going to be like, no way, that guy's here.
Yeah. That's
He was
awesome.
like, I think we'll be surprised at how graceful our God is.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that is kind of what starts to begin to happen with the popular depiction of hell as this place of torture and punishment. Is it takes God, who is totally out of our human understanding and out of our realm of thinking, and puts him right into a little box
Yeah.
and says, this is how we're going to understand it. And I think in my research, a lot of what I've been exploring is how, like, putting those big ideas that are out of our understanding into the box, um, it just, I don't know, it cuts you off from,
Possibilities, like beautiful
yes,
possibilities.
yes, absolutely. And when you brought that book up, I totally remember listening to your podcast episode on seeing gray in the world of black and white. And you said something about how when we put God in this box, it cuts people off from love. And that is what it's all about, isn't it? Like, I think that,
Yes.
yeah. So I think a lot of people that have been hurt by the church have, um,
A lot of people have been hurt by the
yeah,
church.
yes. And I think it
It
comes
makes me
from,
cry. Like that makes me, it's the most embarrassing thing about being a a a pastor, is there is not a world where somebody would want to leave because of what the church is doing or what the church is saying. But there is religious abuse.
Yeah.
That is real.
Yeah, 100%. That kind of goes into my next question too. For people that aren't familiar with the concept of church hurt, can you talk a little bit about what that is, and how that might apply to some of the people that you've worked with?
Um, so perfect example. After my son died, my grandmother, who's very Mormon, she called me, and this was right after I lost my son, and uh, she called and how are you doing? And she was Spanish. She's like, Mejita, how are you doing? And I loved my grandma, and she said, she was telling me that she was so sorry about my son Charlie, and she said, well, now I hope you've learned your lesson and you'll get your life together.
Mm.
And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, Charlie died because of your disobedience and because you left the Mormon church. And so I hope this is motivation for you to get your life together.
Oh,
And I, thank God I did not believe that.
yeah,
I was strong enough, and I know grandma, and grandma and her way of thinking, it's the way she was raised, and I did not internalize it. But I thought to myself, what if I did?
yeah,
It did hurt me. Don't get me wrong. It did upset me that she said that, but I didn't believe it. But what if I did?
yeah,
And the church says those kinds of things. Sometimes there are churches that preach those kinds of things and shame in those kinds of ways. And instead of the people, and I don't blame the people, looking at the person and saying, I don't believe that. I don't
yeah,
feel that. That's not true for me. They look at that person as somehow representing their God, and that they are defining God for me. And I mean, if my grandmother defined my God, I wouldn't believe in God.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
Like, I don't want to believe in that kind of God. God who punishes and allows a child to suffer because of their mother's choices. It's just ridiculous. To me, it's ridiculous. But there have been a lot of churches, and there's been a lot of pain, at, on and a lot of people have left the church, and it's not just because of the church. Oftentimes it's because of the people in the church.
yeah,
The bad mouthing, the shaming, the gossiping, the um it's not our job. It's just not our job. It's not our jobs as pastors. It's not our jobs as members. It's not our job as a community of believers to do anything.
yeah,
To your point before, I think that the only thing that we are called to do is love. That's
yeah,
it. That's it. God said, love me, love others. And when he used the word love, the version of love that he was referring to is actually agape love.
yeah,
And that word agape is, it means, the translation of agape that he used to define love and how we should love others is actually unconditional. Unconditional love.
mhm,
That's the kind of love that we should be extending to everyone.
yeah,
And when we don't, it there's a lot of damage done. And I
yeah,
don't I don't blame people. I really can't blame people who have left the church because of the shame.
yeah, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. And what I think is funny is that, well, not funny at all, but I think this idea of unconditional love is what I see when I read my Bible. But this idea of,
Absolutely.
but this idea of hell is conditional in the way of the fire and brimstone, like you're going to go there and get tortured, is conditional and retributive, and it's an eye for eye, and
Yes.
back at people for what they did on earth. And I just don't see that when I'm reading scriptures. And so it really is sad to me that we've created a narrative that does cut people off from experiencing what I believe that it was intended for.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And I am so with you. And I have to say, Olivia, that was one of those things that I had a really hard time with the Mormon church. I'm like, the Jesus I'm reading about doesn't talk like you. Like,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and like my Jesus, he ate with prostitutes and he loved criminals and he said, hey, I didn't, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they were like, who is this person who eats with sinners and
Yeah.
hangs out with the bad people? And Jesus said, I didn't come for the healthy. And you know what, we shouldn't be here for the healthy either.
Mhm.
We should be here loving the sick.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
Don't you
Um,
think?
yeah, absolutely.
Be
I am so,
such a better world.
yes, it would. Oh my gosh. And I think our definition of church would be so redefined. I think we've unfortunately really
We've messed
narrowed.
that up. We have
Yeah.
messed that up. Jesus didn't come to start a church. He didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? If he did, guess what? We would all belong to the same church.
Hmm.
If he came to start the Methodists or the Catholics or the Mormons or the Presbyterian, like if he said become a Presbyterian, we would all be Presbyterian. There would only be one church, but he did not come to start a denomination. He actually came to start a movement, and
Yeah.
his movement was the only thing that his movement was about was love. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, okay. So, for anyone that is struggling with the idea of hell or this idea that God is a retributive God, or struggling with this idea of justice in the afterlife, all of those things, what would kind of be your piece of advice for navigating that and maybe getting more comfortable sitting in the nuance of it all?
I think it's tricky because there's a lot of counselors
Mhm.
and there's a lot of pastoral care. And so I think it's just really asking around, learning, like finding like-minded people who make you feel safe, who make you feel seen, and who love you as you come, as you are. And challenging, right? Like we're not all done. I want people in my life to challenge me spiritually, and I don't want to, I'm 53. I don't want to die like the way that I am today. I hope that if I get to live another 20, 30, 40 more years, that I get to grow, like I grow and, and, but so I want to be challenged, but I also want to be loved. And so I think it's just really important to find the places and spaces where you feel safe and you feel seen and you feel loved and you feel inspired and a little bit challenged.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, that's all the questions I have, but I'm so appreciative of all of your wisdom and answers. And I know that anyone that is getting counseled by you is just so lucky, because I can just tell from our short exchange that you do create that space for people to feel safe and comfortable, just exploring where they're at in that moment. And I think that is so amazing and so needed in the church. And so,
Thank
yeah,
you.
I just am appreciative.
Life is hard and life is complicated, and It's not linear, it's not black and white. And so surrounding yourself with people who come beside you and not above you, not below you, but beside you is really important.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for, again, for being brave enough to have these kinds of interviews and conversations. I'm super proud of you. I bet your mom is so proud of you.
Thank you.